Do we have oh, yeah, we do. It helps.
Fill out a form.
Okay.
I did it yesterday.
We're going to call the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency to order. This is March 12th, 2020. It's about 1:32. Let's conduct the roll call, please.
Director Crane?
Present.
Director Brown? Director Robinson?
I'm present.
Director Todd?
Present.
Director Rodriguez? Director White?
Present.
Chair Brown?
Present. Okay, moving forward, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Todd, will you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask staff for updates, please.
Sarah Duquette, Mendocino County. Just a couple quick updates. I met with Larry Walker and Associates just so you kind of get an idea of what's coming up on the schedule. So we'll be having a meeting in May. We're also looking at possibly doing a tribal meeting at that time as well. Right now we're looking at canceling the July meeting, but doing the TAC meeting as well as a public meeting, and then you'll have a very robust meeting in September. So we just wanted to give you a heads up that we will be having a meeting in May, and then the July one will be canceled, and then we'll be having one in September. And we'll keep you informed as we schedule the meetings with the tribes and the public meetings. And we're looking at making sure that we have public meetings both in Ukiah, but also in Redwood Valley.
I think that's important. Okay. Now is the time for public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone from the public that would like to speak? Please state your name for the record and know you have 3 minutes.
My name is Mike Webster. I represent the RCD at this time, and I did have one comment to make based on the meeting in January, and that was concerning the elevation of the aquifer, the groundwater basin, on January 1st, 2015. And I wanted to say that making that a marker is probably not a bad idea. And if you take a look at that time, it was towards the end of the drought, if I remember right, and there were several households that lost their wells because they went dry. And to look at it as a point to where, okay, we don't really need to worry about that, but if you don't worry about it, there'll be several more that go dry. And those people have to find their resources somewhere else. They either have to drill a new well, have to hook up to a supply line that's nearby, or they have to have it trucked in. And I only speak of that because my daughter was one of those people. And so, looking forward, I just want you to consider that point as a marker that could be used to try not to exceed. I know if there's a large drought, longer drought, probably that's a moot point, but it is something to think about. And that's it.
Thank you very much for your comment. Okay, anyone else for public comment? Seeing no one come forward, we'll move on to action items, and we have 5A. Ms. Duquette, will you please give us an introduction on that item?
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. So we've talked in the past about the funding of the agency. So back when the Groundwater Sustainability Agency was created, the initial, the government members of the board paid a $5,000 contribution to keep the GSA up running to handle the administration and the meetings, et cetera. And I wanted to bring this forward before we have the budget in May of our current financial status. So right now we have $7,678 left in the trust account. We still will have the clerking costs for the year, which will be charged back towards the end of the fiscal year, as well as administration costs for the meetings from our office, which we charge on a quarterly basis. So based on our projections, we think that, wrong item, that would help. Based on the projections, we think that we will end the year around 3,700. It might be a little more, like 4,000. It seems with the lesser meetings that we'll probably be spending about $5,000 a year. It's been up to like 6 or 7, but there was a time when we first started we were having meetings like every single month. So because that dollar amount is going to be getting low, you're not going to have enough to cover all the administration costs from next year. And we want to inform you of kind of what we're doing. We've talked a lot about we're creating the GSP, and we're also looking at the financial long-term obligations of how to run this agency. So in March, we're kicking off our GSP evaluation, financial evaluation, where our team will come in and really start that conversation and work on the financial options you have to fund the agency and the plan moving forward, so that you can make these decisions over the next 2 years as you approve the plan. So talking with Chair Brown just about the financial situation, I brought this item forward. My suggestion would be considering contributions of $3,000 for the member agencies, and that will get you through the next 2 years and probably part of the third year. Essentially get you to the point where you've adopted your GSP and you've adopted your GSP financial plan, and you know how long-term you're going to fund the agency. That will cover the cost of the administration, staff time, and clerking time for your 6 meetings.
So
And other things that come up, that aren't covered by grant work.
So you're asking each member agency that does pay in to consider the $3,000 for their upcoming, well, actually their new year budget.
Yeah, so in the JPA, it allows the board to assess contributions, and I put this section number into it based on how much it costs to operate it. My suggestion, because we do have a unique situation where we have 2 stakeholder chairs, they aren't an actual agency, they're actual stakeholders, but we do have 4 members that are represented by a government entity to consider that there's a dues of $3,000 for those government entities to fund the operation for the next 2 years. For the next 2 years, as we finalize the financial plan and the GSP long-term, for you guys to make the decision of how you want to fund it. That will definitely get you through the next 2 years and probably a little bit more, since we'll probably be ending the year at about 3,700. And that would be my suggestion, and doing it now should give enough time for the agencies to go through their budget processes, because essentially the dues then would be charged next fiscal year in July.
Directors, questions of Ms. Duquette?
Question of the chair, is it appropriate to move on her recommendation at this point?
Let's go to public comment, and I'll come right back to you. Public comment on this item about dues, I don't want to say increase, but dues being assessed. Seeing no one come forward, it's back to the board. Vice Chair Crane?
Well, if a motion is appropriate at this time, I so move.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
I did.
So Director White was the second. It was Vice Chair Crane who made the motion. Can we please have a roll call vote?
Director Brown, Director Robinson,
Abstain.
Director Todd,
Aye.
Director Rodriguez, Director White,
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Director Crane,
Aye.
and Chair Brown.
Aye. And actually, we only have 5 of us here today, and Director Rodriguez is not. He's an alternate.
Yeah, he was replaced by by Director Todd
That's not true
a
either.
while
No,
ago.
Director Todd is Jerry's position.
Before Jerry,
No, Rodrigue was.
was
the
it you?
alternate.
For
He's
you,
my
for
alternate.
White, okay.
Yeah, he would be Director White's alternate. Okay, thank you. And I know it's hard to get used to us, but we appreciate you being here with us today, sir. Okay, moving on. 5B, update and discussion regarding Proposition 68, solicitations for groundwater sustainability plan, development and projects. Staff, please do the introduction.
Sarah Duquette, Executive Office. We just want to give you an update of where we are with Proposition 68. We submitted the grant application in November. We were on the the draft recommendations of DWR for full funding of our project, which is about $1.2 million. That was out for comment, and I believe it closed in mid-February. And so we're just looking forward to the final award statement coming out from DWR, and maybe our DWR representative here during public comment might have an update on when we'll receive that, but I wanted you to know that we are on the recommended list for approval.
Directors, questions of staff? Okay. So we're just receiving the report. There are no questions. So we're going to move on to item C, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the development of the sustainability goals. So I'm not sure who's going to do the presentation on that one.
Yeah. So this is me, Laura Foglia, Larry Walker Associates. And what we want to present to you today is kind of the overarching goal that we have to develop before we really enter into the undesirable results evaluation and a little bit more on technical details. So this is it's going to be more like a qualitative discussion on how we see this groundwater sustainability plan coming together.
So before you go forward,
Yep.
I know there was extra material sitting here. Or was that not, it was in our packet? Okay.
So you should have a sheet in front of you. On the screen, there's going to be questions that come up for discussion. Those questions are also in front of you in a paper form that you can use to scribble on.
Okay.
And record your thoughts as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah. So, oops, I went too fast. We will give you a very quick update on the technical work that we are doing, but right now we are moving a little bit like in parallel with the technical work that will keep going. We are shooting for having everything kind of lined up for the groundwater model and the surface water model by May. And at the same time, we would like to start reviewing and discussing a little bit more in details these sustainable management criteria that we introduced last time. And we started reviewing some of those yesterday with the TAC, and with the idea that we will come with more, let's say, numbers next time. But what we want to concentrate today during this meeting is on developing this sustainability goal. So for the technical work, you know that we are kind of following the USGS approach for the entire Russian River. So we have all the surface water model up and running, and actually it's showing results that are very acceptable. Actually, it's pretty good, I would say, in terms of we did some kind of preliminary calibration. We are now adding more data, but the surface water parts, let's say, it's all there. And as you know, it's done in a way that when USGS is done with their full big Russian River model, they will be able to kind of incorporate what we are doing. And we are now concentrating more on the groundwater model that then will be coupled, so there will be a single model. So we are adding a couple of features into the groundwater model that are needed for the full coupling down the road. And we also started the initial calibration using the data that we have. We also reviewed some continuous well data that we received from California land stewardship, yeah, and they are very useful for giving us information on temporal water level trends. So it's all coming together, and we will have it ready for a final update and show you how it looks like in May. Based on some discussion from mostly from the TAC at the previous meeting, we are reviewing the land use and the use of surface water and groundwater throughout the valley. So we already fixed some of the percentage that you can see in this plot, but at the same time, we are also looking at having a model that is able to change the land use over time, because we know our model starts in 1990. A lot of things changed between 1990 and now. So now our model is able to update. Obviously, it's not updating every year, but we are showing the biggest changes between pears and grapes. Yeah.
So the stakeholder meeting that you had following our last meeting was very helpful.
Yes, it was.
Great.
We got really good feedbacks, and it's useful. And again, these numbers might not still be the perfect one in terms of usage of groundwater versus surface water, but we are kind of narrowing down where are the problems and adapting our models so we can have a more, acceptable representation of water use in the valley. And also we need to remember that we finally got from USGS this new package that they developed, and Sonoma Water is already using. It's a package that will help us automatically evaluating the amount of water which is applied based on different crop and soil type and everything. So we finally have that, and then we are including that into the new model. So unfortunately, we had to wait for the release of the tool, so we couldn't do it earlier. But now we have a good understanding of how things look like based on our previous research. So we just update using the new package. And I think it's gonna be useful because that's the same package that the big Russian River model will be using. So we will be all on the same page. And at the end, it's gonna be hopefully all together: the surface water, this ag package with the agricultural demand estimation, and the groundwater model. So this is what you will see. Maybe not in the final version in May, but it will be all together by May. Question on? We can move forward. We also want to give you a quick, sorry.
This is part of the item 6D.
Oh, sorry.
We're going to come back to this a little
Okay,
later.
sorry. And this one, I think it's, we don't need to go through the TSS. You want to give an update?
Maybe
Okay. And, sorry, we just ordered differently. So now what we want to do is to start discussing again about this sustainable management criteria. We gave a kind of extended introduction last time, and now we are reviewing and revisiting some of the concepts. And you probably remember this sketch from last time. The goal is that with this plan, we want to avoid 6 undesirable results, which are declining water level, reduction of storage, seawater intrusion. Okay, we can cross this one. We don't want to degrade water quality, and we want to avoid length of silence. You will see that probably also this one can be a quick check because we couldn't find much on that. And then we need to avoid impact of groundwater onto surface water bodies and groundwater dependent ecosystems. The first sustainability indicator that we are concentrated on is the degraded water quality. So that's what we discussed at the TAC meeting yesterday, and we got some recommendation that we will bring to this board in May. We just need to summarize all the input that we got yesterday. But for each of these undesirable results, we need to develop kind of an independent plan and define threshold, objective, and a sustainability goal for each of these undesirable results. These plots are done thinking about what is the first undesirable results we want to discuss, which is water quality. So that's the reason why we basically have the undesirable results in the upper part of the plot, because thinking about water quality in an intuitive way, you just want to say, I would like to avoid level of contamination that are above a certain level. So that's the reason why these are kind of, when we will do the water levels, it's going to be the other way around. So the red block will be on the bottom. But now let's think about our first goal, which is what we will summarize in May, which is looking at water quality.
Laura, could I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
You said we were able to probably rapidly dismiss 2 of the undesirable results. Is there evidence that water quality is an issue or would potentially be an issue in this basin, or can we summarily dismiss this one with as well?
So the thing is that, seawater intrusion, you can dismiss it because it's not there. Subsidence, I will show you next time that basically we don't really have data. For water quality, we will discuss it next time, but we have some data, so we have to acknowledge some of the work that it's there, but this doesn't mean that it's a problem. So we just have to put it there because we need to acknowledge that we look at that. We define some criteria, for example, for not degrading the actual condition, but as long as everybody is on board with the idea we want to keep protecting our drinking water quality, then we couldn't highlight any problem yesterday. So for sure, I can already say that. But we will wrap up the recommendation. We are making it as simple as possible because there are no real issues. But you cannot just say in the GSP there's nothing. So you have to at least look at the numbers and demonstrate using the numbers that there are no actual problems.
I may have more questions, but yeah,
Sure.
keep going.
Okay. So, quick recap. The undesirable results, each agency will be defining what's significant and unreasonable. So it's not something that the state define in the same way for everybody. So that's part of our goal here. And it's basically a statement that describes the condition that we don't want to see happening. So how do we want to protect our groundwater system from now for the next 20 years and even farther later after the 2042. And undesirable results can be defined for each of the sustainability indicators. So for today, for example, we will kind of concentrate on water quality, just with the idea of understanding how it works. The minimum threshold is, which is in this case the maximum threshold, it's anything worse is considered an undesirable result. So basically, if the threshold for water quality is this yellow line here, we can, and this is, for example, the maximum limit for drinking water quality. Whatever is above that, it means that your water is not drinkable anymore, and you may want to prevent that to happen. The measurable objective is a sort of management target that is providing you with a usable buffer that you can use, for example, during droughts, or if we think about water quality, let's say that something happens and something spills in the groundwater, you need to start the cleanup, and it's not you that start the cleanup, it's still the regional water board, so that's very important to highlight. But you need a buffer in case something happens. And this is basically this white area here. So you, defining the measurable objective, you say, ideally, I would like all my numbers to stay in this green block, but I understand that it can happen, something can happen, and I may have to go into the white area, and that's okay. As long as you show that you go into the white area and you are still doing your best to bring things back, or at least you have actions in place that can bring things down again. And in terms of thinking about water quality, it might be exactly like something happens, a tank spilling benzene or whatever, you have to call this regional water board up. It may take some time. So for some time you might be above a certain level, but you need to show that things are coming down again. Questions about these two main definitions? Okay, I put this up because I got many comments from other boards and other TAG, It looks like this document that DWR developed about sustainable management criteria might be a good reading for everybody. So if you want to do your evening homework, that might be something that it's very useful, because I understand that all this new definition, it's kind of overwhelming at some point. So this might be a good reading for everybody. And we can also distribute it if you want. It's available online, but we can also send it to everybody as a PDF. So the process that we are going through, and we basically started yesterday with the talk, and is then coming to you guys, is we are assessing which of the 600 sustainability indicators are applicable for this valley. And this is where basically, Zach, coming back to your question, we can see for sure we don't have seawater intrusion, so we can kind of cross that one. For the others, we still have to do our due diligence and demonstrate through existing data that it's eventually not a problem. And we need to develop a narrative which is going to be mostly qualitative, with a description of what constitutes a significant and unreasonable condition. So what is not acceptable for the specifically for the Ukiah Valley. And then this narrative, it's going to be transformed into quantitative values. So we will have undesirable results and a minimum threshold, which is going to be a number. And same for whatever we decide is the desirable condition, which is the measurable objective. And we can set interim milestones to achieve a certain measurable objective. You might not be there yet, but you may have the goal to get there. And then there is also this sort of overarching sustainability goal, which is not linked to each of the criteria, but is more like what I would like to see in this valley. Doesn't matter if it's water quality, it's water level, it depends. It's gonna be different, and each of the beneficial users will have a different perspective on how this goal might be developed. And basically this takes us to what you have in front of you in terms of the little paper where eventually there is space for writing, because I believe it can be a good way to start the discussion about, okay, what's the end game? What are we shooting for? And again, remember that whatever we put as a sustainability goal now, it's not written on the stone. It's gonna be a living piece. We can modify it while we go through the process. So we want to get it started and then keep changing based on what we find out while we do this sustainable criteria evaluation. And Sarah already discussed about that. So I would like to go through the, let's say, exercise, because I think that's the most important piece of the discussion. The discussion today. Sorry, and this directly from the law. So each agency shall establish in its plan a sustainability goal for the basin that culminates in the absence of undesirable results. It's a very qualitative goal at this point that will become more quantitative while we go through the process. But we need to have at the beginning of our chapter 3 a sort of description of what do we want to see happening in this basin. And we develop a few questions, and I will read the ones exactly that you have in your paper. I summarize them here just to make them also in the slide. They are slightly, their word is slightly different, but it's the same concept. So we would like to ask you if you can just write down, even in 2 lines, we don't need so much, no need to put your names. We are not going to score by name, but have an idea of, for example, in terms of vision, what does sustainable groundwater looks like in Ukiah Valley? And this is the vision. And then the next 2 questions are about a general overarching goals. So if the groundwater is managed sustainably in the valley, what it has achieved. And we also put together a worst case scenario. So what you wouldn't like to see happening through this process. And then the next page, it's about thinking of another beneficial users and see if you think that somebody may have a different perspective than what you have. And we can give you a few minutes to start writing down ideas.
And then we'll come back and they can report out.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll give you a few minutes just to think about it, and then we'll go through each of the questions, and you guys can share your comments on them. If
Yeah,
you
and,
wanna.
and you know, this should have been out prior, because just at a meeting
Yeah.
doesn't give deep thought.
We
And-
put it in the presentation slide, and then we thought that you might want a hard copy
I-
with you, but it will be uploaded to the item.
But something like this then focuses, and you can write your comment better than you can on the presentation. So anyone?
So if you just want to take a few minutes to look at the questions, or if you want to just go through each one of the questions and throw out
Start
your
brainstorming.
ideas. So we could do either way if you want a minute or two, or we can just start going through the questions.
Yes.
You ready to go through it?
Sure.
Everyone
Let's
else?
go forward.
All right, we'll start with the first question. We want your kind of thoughts of the board members is, what does sustainable groundwater management look like in the Ukiah Valley groundwater basin? And we'd like to hear from each of the board members of what they'd like it to look like. And it can be simple and short.
I wrote down access, I wrote down fair use, and I wrote down productive use.
Mine's more simple.
A happy face?
Yeah.
Were emojis
Like
allowed?
quality of life
Quality of life.
Oh, that was my next one. That was.
and providing for all beneficial uses, the ability to provide.
So I had no negative changes from the existing variability. I view things as pretty good, and they fluctuate considerably. So I'm not looking at trying to hold things in any particular place, just that we don't leave our present conditions of existence, the way things have been.
Oh. You can't be heard.
Why not? Oh,
Did you
Because
get
they're
that?
sitting way
Yeah.
back.
you heard what I said.
Yeah, I got it.
I'm simple. I think it's productive to show that we have adequate groundwater that will provide adequate water for all uses, for all different production and city and municipal. We need just to show that. I don't think there's a groundwater issue in this area, but the state wants us to prove it, and I think that's all we need to do.
What do you say?
Director Crane seconds your motion.
No. I think that what we're here for is to determine what it looks like. And having a preconceived notion of what it looks like, I think, is counterproductive to what we're here for. These are all principles which are already established in the regulations. So what I voiced at the last meeting was a concern that there are two paths, so to speak, pointed out in the legislation. One is a number specific about what the drawdown can be, and the other is to develop a set of standards for what that drawdown can be, and it's my hope that we stay focused on the latter, not the former. So that means we need to learn a lot more before we have a clear vision of what it looks like.
Good thoughts.
Okay, so if the groundwater is managed sustainably in the valley, what do you think what it has achieved? So I think it's pretty much the same of the vision.
What does the success look
The
like in your
successful
eyes?
look like. So if you have something else to add to what you all already said, what's really like, yeah, mostly what's success look like
be consistent with the law and preserve as much ability to utilize the water within those standards.
Okay, and if we think about the worst case scenario, so what do you don't want to see happening? So what we should look at, like that specific condition shouldn't happen anymore, or we don't want to see this happening in the future.
Well, before you go there, I did want to add
Sorry.
to the, what would you achieve through the sustainable management? And I think one thing that we don't want to lose sight of is resiliency to climate change.
That's a good point, yeah.
We need to be prepared to deal with that
Which could be too much or too little.
change.
Yeah.
But when you hear how much rain we're supposed to get over the weekend, it makes you feel good because we've been in reverse.
Well, I have a hunch we'll get not enough, if we lather up with the first few raindrops, we won't get the soap off.
Not if we give the full 20 minutes or 20 seconds.
And I do apologize for my earlier comment. Somehow I missed that page of 1, 2, and 3 when I went over my packet. but
Yeah, it's the same
I did have the
questions.
examples and
Yeah.
read those.
No, that's fine. No, it's just that we figured that it was easier if somebody wanted to write and we can collect your piece of papers for later, but it's the same questions. Okay, so the worst case scenario, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to
something?
say that. I was going to say exactly that. What does worst case scenario look like for you with?
Or state intervention.
Okay.
I wrote that down a little bit differently, but it's the same concept. Ignoring the status of the aquifer, one worst-case scenario for me is that we're continuing to have these meetings and writing new reports, and my kids are sitting on this board 50 years from now.
That is a worst-case scenario.
Yeah, right?
I would see worst case would be water wars, economic decline, environmental degradation.
I think overdrafting to the point where it's overregulated and we lose a lot of our ability to collect that water. And I agree with you, having the state involved would be another disaster.
If you want to have it worse, get the state more involved.
And the Department of Water Resources proves that every day.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last one. What did you say? I
If you
couldn't
want to
hear.
make it worse, get the state more involved.
Okay.
Meaning we need to do it for ourselves and write a good plan that'll be acceptable, because we do not want the state coming in. Okay.
And does somebody have idea about how other beneficial users you think would see probably different outcomes out from this plan, or maybe they are looking for a different approach, maybe somebody that is not represented? You can also think about it and then
I think our duty's pretty well declared in the legislation. And I think we need to stay the course to find out, to clearly understand what resource we have available that does not undo the system.
okay.
And so to prejudge what that is not where I want to go.
I'm going to kind of reframe the third one. Are there any other types of beneficial users who we might not be thinking about that might have different perspectives that we should really engage or include in this process that we haven't so far? We gave some examples on the back, a lot of them that we've reached out to, like the municipalities. We're starting to reach out to tribes. But are there really key of some of these users that we really haven't looked at, or we might be of concern that they might have a different perspective that we should kind of investigate?
Well, what I hear is from the public, from constituents, don't tell me I have to put a meter on my well. And that's mostly private landowners that I'm hearing that from. But, you know, that, I don't know if that belongs here or not, but that's what struck me first.
Yeah, no,
But that's
that's
definitely
On
what I hear.
question number 3.
Yeah.
no, these are really the things that the best way is to brainstorm a little bit, so we kind of have some directions. And again, we will summarize all these things, and probably you will have a summary for your next meeting, and it will be, again, a living document.
And
So-
we've asked these same questions from the TAC, so we can come back in May, so you can kind of look at kind of your initial thoughts on these questions and the tax, and bring it all back together.
Because really, the general public knows this is going on, but we haven't heard from them a lot. As far as being here at these meetings or receiving input. So, you know, maybe that's up to us to do news releases and just tell them where we are in the process and what is due and when our meetings are, and continue that throughout the next year or so until we have to turn in our final plan.
Yeah. And I think probably this is something that maybe something like this is what we should bring at the public meetings to try to collect some more feedback. And because, as you say, they're not really yet participating in the process, they just are barely informed.
A question. In the information that's been collected so far that you have seen, is there any indication as to what sort of drawdown is sustainable? What, in other words, where the legislation, where it looks for a level based on a date certain, was at a time when this community was not relying significantly on the aquifer, was working from underflow. Drawing down the aquifer, do we have any data at all of how much drawdown before it would trigger any of the things that are not supposed to happen, that this legislation is supposed to prevent? Do we have a significant amount of data in that regard?
So we didn't get into details on the drawdown yet, and it's true we don't have so many data, and you all know that there are not so many data available. But we will be reporting on all this. I mean, still, the January 2015 baseline, if you want to use something different, it needs to be demonstrated. So
Well,
we just have to think about it.
There's
I'm not
another-
making any
The other
assumption.
approach, though, which is to
Sorry?
the other approach is to establish a set of standards, operational standards, rather than a certain level based upon a historical benchmark. Particularly in the case of where this basin hasn't been stressed, was not stressed in that time frame, so to settle on that date certain level seems to me to be foolhardy for this agency. I just want to make sure we keep that in our minds and find a way within the rules to have the flexibility to draw down within the intent of preserving that resource, but not overstressing.
So Doug, I'm a little confused on your point. Are you suggesting that there be some kind of analysis to decide on some level of standards that would be
I believe the
used
TAC
in
is already
place of-
giving this thought. And it is, rather than a level certain, it is what would be the measure of drawing too much? What would establish what preserves the agency's ability to be more flexible than the simple number? And
We have our TAC member. Please introduce your name to the record.
Sean White, City of Ukiah. I'm on the TAC, and this issue was discussed a bit at the TAC yesterday, and I think what Mr. Crane is trying to get at is something that I was referring to, and I heard others discuss as well. You know, that was going down at that period because we were in the middle of a drought, and that particular drought was 5 years long. So to consider that the basement of all time, when we might hit a 7-year drought, may not be really anything that's resulting from a pattern of extended overuse and sequential drawdown, but really just a longer drought. And one of the things I said yesterday is, you know, we'd like to see our triggers and our bottom be really more of a trend-driven thing that's linked to context of what's happening hydrologically at that time, right? So like if we have normal years and plenty of rain and our groundwater is still going down, that's a bad thing. If we're in the middle of a drought and it's drawing down in a fashion similar to it has in previous droughts, that's to be expected. And then on the backside of that, we'll need to make sure we manage it in a way that it recovers. But just putting this sort of like hard line in the sand that was linked to a 4-year drought may not be something we want to do. In particular, considering things like climate change, where droughts may be slightly longer than that, but also not do irreversible damage to our groundwater as well. You know, after the last one, drawdown was, at least in the bucket of the aquifer, it was fully recharged in 1 year after that 4-year drought. So to sort of like cut ourselves off at the knees for something that recovered in 1 year previously just doesn't seem like the kind of line we want to shackle ourselves with in perpetuity with this thing.
Okay, so what you're talking about is context, that
Yeah.
we be sure to include context.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I
that
really
there-
think like, you know, if you look at the drawdown patterns for like the Central Valley that caused this whole mess, it never really rebounded to full recovery ever. It's just stepping down, stepping down, stepping down. Where here we have step downs that occur with, you know, periods of bad hydrology, and then it steps back up. And we just want to make sure that we're keeping in mind that, you know, periodic drawdown is normal during a drought, but if that's happening and at a sustained duration during periods of non-drought, it is really more what we need to be worried about, not some fixed level that's not linked to what's happening. So yeah, context. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
What is that magic date again?
January 2015.
January 2015.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
For the record, it's not magic.
Understood. And then my next was the motion to ban the 7-year drought, Sean.
So
I'll second that.
Maybe Arjen can correct me. From what I understand, so January 2015, it's kind of the baseline we should use. If we want to use something different, it needs to be justified. This doesn't mean that if your levels, let's say for another year, for some reason in time, they go lower than that, you are not failing because 1 or 2 years are lower, as long as you demonstrate that things are coming back. So it can happen that something like huge drought or whatever affects your numbers once, but still your goal should be to still bring things back up. So this is how I understand it. And I know.
And we do have Aaron from DWR here. If you,
Look up the email, we had some email.
Yeah, that one. I think it's this should. Okay.
yeah, we the Larry Walker team has been talking with DWR and has sent these kind of questions to make sure that we're getting clarity of what our parameters are when we make the plan in terms of date certain and things like that. So as we have this conversation, we can be sure to give you the kind of correct parameters.
Anything else?
Other ideas that you would like to see addressed by this plan? I really appreciate the thought that we should get it done properly now, so that in 20 years you can use this plan without redoing it completely. I think that should be one of our goal, honestly, to use this opportunity to put together something that you as a community can use in the future without reinventing the wheel. I get it.
And I appreciate also what you've included
Okay, yeah.
from Santa Cruz, Salinas.
Yeah, and I can give you some reasoning behind. So you know that a number of GSPs have been already submitted on January 31st this year. So, and most of all these GSPs, not most, all those GSPs are from overdrafted basins. So the critically overdrafted with a timeline which is different than what we are working on. And I understand that none of the basins really is similar to Ukiah, so you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But I kind of highlighted the ones that eventually can be comparable if they are not, even if they are still different. So Mid-County Santa Cruz is the only one that really takes into account a discussion on surface water depletion. All the others, down in the lower part of Central Valley, they don't really have a lot of surface water, so they couldn't really present much on that. That's the reason why I included Mid-County Santa Cruz. And these GSPs are all available online. You can go and look at them. And
Except
Madeira.
Madeira.
Yeah. Yeah. All but Madeira are available. You can look at them and have an idea of how they develop their criteria, their management actions, and everything has been done by different people, so they are very different. Even in the definition of the sustainability goal, for example, Mid-County Santa Cruz has this big write-up, and Salina has barely these 6 lines. What's right, what's wrong, it's our judgment, your judgment actually, because this is going to be your GSP. So we can be more detailed, or and go from summarizing what we discussed today and what we discussed yesterday with the tag, start from that and then maybe trim down. But I like the idea. We'll try to do the same also when we discuss the sustainable criteria, so that first we discuss how you see the things moving forward and how it has been addressed by other GSPs already submitted. Again, we don't know which of this one will be approved, what will be asked to them as a review or further studies, but still, it gives us an idea. So I think it's interesting because of that. The other information that I'm trying to use is as a learning process is, you know that some of the basin decide to apply for an alternative plan, so not having a full GSP, but an alternative plan in 2016. And some of these plans have not been approved, and comments about why they've not been approved are online.
Humboldt County, lower Eel River Basin.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to use those, the one not approved, to learn what we should do, because I think it's most of the ones that have not been approved, really a big part of the comments was about how they were dealing with surface water, groundwater interaction. So that's why it's very useful for the basin here. So I'm trying to summarize and try to see what we can learn. But this is how the process is gonna go forward. And next time, based on how it went yesterday on the water quality discussion, the idea is that we will summarize what the TAC suggested and come here with the final, not final, because these things will still be reviewed by the time we submit it, but sort of recommendation on how to move forward for water quality, and ideally also for subsidence. So we kind of see the process moving forward. We will start checking 2 boxes, and then we go into the more critical discussions. Comments? Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
We have a slide for the next item as well in the presentation. So we're going backwards for the next item.
Sorry for that. Oops.
Do you guys want to return to the
S-
2015 discussion?
Yeah, come here. Yeah.
Okay. Please state your name for the record.
Yeah, you just.
It's going, okay. Aaron Cuthbertson, California Department of Water Resources. So this came up because in the January 9th meeting, during that presentation, there was a slide that said that measurable objectives cannot be much lower than prior to January 1st, 2015. So there was some discussion about that then, and that slide might have been a little bit misleading. So we had some back and forth over email after that meeting. So I pulled up those emails. I'll read some of this. So I looked that up in the regulations and then in the best management practice, sustainable management criteria document that you showed in your presentation today. There's a section on this that describes this, and that's on page 30 of that document, if you want to look it up. But I'll read a little bit of it here.
So you said page 30?
Page 30 of the Sustainable Management Criteria Best Management Practices document that DWR produced in 2017. Okay, so what that says is measurable objectives when an undesirable result occurred before January 1st, 2015. Sigma states that a GSP may, but is not required to address undesirable results that occurred before and have not been corrected by January 1st, 2015. Once minimum thresholds have been developed and an undesirable result numerically defined, the GSA may evaluate whether that undesirable result was present prior to January 1st, 2015. This evaluation is not possible until the GSA has defined what constitutes a significant and unreasonable condition, an undesirable result. If the evaluation indicates that an undesirable result occurred prior to January 1st, 2015, the GSA must set measurable objectives to either maintain or improve upon the conditions that were occurring in 2015. So what it's saying is, if you determine after your analysis that an undesirable result was present and it occurred prior to 2015, January 1st, 2015, then you've got to maintain that at least. But if you, that's the only criteria that's described here. So if you determine that there isn't an undesirable result present on that date, then you're not held to that level. Does that make sense?
I mean, if
Read the.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain. Read the document, and then we could have another discussion about it. But if there's an undesirable result present on January 1st, 2015 or prior, then
it becomes a floor.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. But if you determine that it isn't, that there wasn't an undesirable result present on that date, and that's going to come out of your analysis. We don't know that right now. Then you don't know what the floor could be potentially lower than that.
Or a process to set of standards to determine better stop now.
Right.
So, question. So, from the discussion that Sean raised about context, looking at the level at that point in time and seeing that with the first wet winter, it recovered completely from the previous 3 years of decline, that would be viewed as that's not an undesirable condition because it's remedied regularly by intermittent wet years.
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer that.
I mean, that would be the
You're going to
argument
answer
you
that
could
question, but that could be an argument.
make. Okay.
Well, and if subsidence wasn't occurring, if we don't reach far enough to get salt water, or far enough above sea level that should never be an issue here, unless everything melts. too likely anytime soon. So if those items that are called out as this is not what's supposed to be allowed to happen, if those aren't happening, that seems to me to be reasonable criteria for establishing a floor based upon what we learn over time. So preserving the ability and declaring the obligation to be respectful of those circumstances should they arise, it seems to me that's how we actually find the floor. Because I don't think we have enough data to know where it is in terms of those outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. You're gonna, through your analysis and through the discussions that you have, you're gonna determine what's unreasonable and significant, undesirable result in your basin. So, and you know, that's gonna take gathering data and doing analysis and finding out what sort of things happen or have happened in your basin.
So it needs to be living rather than a floor that we set, quote, now. For us, that's my belief as to what this body should effort doing.
Mm-hmm. And it could be that, you know, these plans can be updated over time. So every 5 years you update the plan. It may be that you get more information and you continue to improve upon what those measurable objectives are, what the thresholds are.
I very much appreciate you bringing this clarity.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just have a minor observation to share. I'm getting tripped up, the word undesirable, our undesirable result, and separating out what are naturally occurring undesirable results versus human-induced undesirable results.
Good point.
We're left with these nuances. You know, maybe 2015 was a bad result, but not undesirable.
Right, and I think
because
that's
it was a
part of what-
natural part of the process.
Part of what I think we need to set up on the front end, that those things that we clearly understand, those things that we want to have come out of it, and our best shot through some technical aspects of how we think we get there. And as stated, it gets reviewed. It should be a living document, at least a 5-year analysis and revision based upon what we learned, because the world's not steady state from a regulatory point of view or a physical point of view.
And actually, you know, climate change scenario and whatever scenarios, they will be included in the plan. So we are required to do water budget for historical condition, current condition, and future projections. Again, they are projections, but they will give us an idea of how the system will react to another drought or things like that. And then the main role, it's not only thinking about, for you, is not only thinking about what's the threshold we don't want to cross, but is if we cross this threshold, we need to have actions in plan. So we know what to do if something happens. And that's part of the plan. That's the next chapter. So it's not just looking at what's happening, but thinking about the future and what can be done in the valley to eventually prevent and help out in case of a huge drought, for example. So like what Al was saying, some kind of resiliency to climate change, so that we will be, even with a 7 years drought, 8 years drought, I don't know, we will be, you will be able to manage your system in a way that it's sustainable.
Do you think that it's possible through the use of models to sort of ask the question, at what point are we done? Like, it's going to be dry for 10 years and then it rains once, we can survive. It's going to be dry for 20 years and it rains once. I mean, at some point it's like, okay, we just got to move because there's no way to bail out of this. Is that something that
Yeah.
can be a question that you could put into
We
that?
can together design scenarios that we think we are interested in and just use the model to understand how the system is reacting to whatever we would like to see.
So through that model, you could say, like, if we were to experience 15 years of drought, we would be put into the position where we would have to cut water use over the board by everybody, kind of thing. I mean, would we be going into that degree of specificity in this plan?
Yeah, the idea is that let's imagine that we run the model with 15 years of drought and the same groundwater use that you have right now, for example, over the next 15 years, and we can see how that's gonna impact the drawdown and the surface water and the groundwater dependent ecosystems that you have. And obviously you don't have to take the number as like a fixed number. It's gonna be some error in our calculation, but you can use the model to understand how much drawdown you are causing because of 15 years of drought, no actions in place, and just same business as usual in terms of use of groundwater.
So is it, for us to have this plan complete and have it approved, do we need to ask that question and then include actions, et cetera?
You need to have some actions in the plan. So we will need to come up with some ideas of what can be done for worst case scenarios like what you are, for example, thinking about.
Well,
Is that
that's going to be an
reasonable?
awkward
point.
Yeah. There are going to be a lot more interesting meetings coming up with some hard discussions.
Does that seem reasonable to put a 15-year drought in plan when we've never had one in
I think we
history?
were just throwing number out. We will be
Okay.
discussing
And it's
and
like-
just thinking about what we want to look at.
Right, okay.
I think
And my point is not to be saddled with that date certain, because that may not be anywhere near a challenge for this aquifer. And if we don't think about it on the front end, we'll wind up being backed into that and then trying to figure out how to fix it if we can.
Okay, directors, are we ready to move on to the next item?
yeah. And it's just
Did
information.
You can,
You go. Sorry.
yes, we're ready to move on to the next item.
Okay, but I thought you had a question.
No. I just wanted to. I was just
Okay.
moving fast.
All
Sorry.
right. It's all right, it's just me. So we're on D, update and discussion regarding the Technical Advisory Committee's Groundwater Interaction Working Group.
Yeah, we'll make this really quick. So at the TAC meeting in January, we created a working group to talk about the groundwater, surface water interconnection. And that working group includes Laurel Marcus, Marcus Trota, Sean White, and Mike Webster. And we're going to do a report out from the TAC, and you'll see these little reports as we go along as the group meets. But Laura's just going to talk about kind of the first meeting and a couple of things that they set up.
Yeah. So it's obviously you will be seeing everything, but this group is going to help us summarizing all the information, all the studies that different entities are doing in the valley, in the bigger Russian River, or in this valley specifically, and with the goal of, in a sense, helping us out on leveraging local expertise so that we don't have to spend our days on Google looking for reports if somebody has them already available. So we had the first meeting and we started discussing what we think is a good definition for an healthy and unhealthy system when we talk about surface water in the basin. We got ideas and suggestions about studies that exist already and data sets that are available that we can probably get access to. And we also got suggestion of specific person that we should reach out to. And so we are organizing in these weeks a series of conference calls so that we can call everybody, gather all the material, doing our job of summarizing before we bring it to you as a smaller package. Let's put it that way. We also discuss ideas on how to prioritize monitoring location and data collection. So which are the key locations that eventually we should look at in terms of the connection between surface water and groundwater, if there are specific tributaries that needs to be included because of some fish or ecosystem or whatever we need to consider. And now we have a plan already for the future group meetings on starting summarizing and go a little bit more in detail.
And so you'll be hearing report outs from the TAC and this working group as we move forward in the different upcoming meetings.
So you said the group, I think I'm missing one, but Laurel Marcus, Sean White, Mike Webster, and
Marcus Troda from Sonoma Water.
got you. Okay. Okay. Anyone? Directors?
Nothing to report.
Okay. I do have something, and I was over at State yesterday, and it's about the Madera substation, which caused me to do some studying when I got home almost at 6 o'clock last night. Wanted to see what was available. But the Madera substation, or sub-basin, excuse me, they actually have 4 entities working in that basin that are separate from one another. And so there's 3 water districts and 1 irrigation district. And so I do have this letter, and it's from the California Department of Water Resources. And I'm just going to read this one paragraph. And this is going to the State Water Resources Control Board, and the gentleman that is in charge of Office of Research, Planning, and Performance, and that's Groundwater Management Program. And then there's the consultant, and it's David's Engineering Incorporated, and they're also out of Davis. But in this letter to the consultant, says Sigma requires that basins preparing multiple GSPs prepare a coordination agreement for the entire basin. Then they give the code. The lack of a fully signed coordination agreement fails to satisfy the requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act or the GSP, the plan, regulations. In accordance with the GSP regulations, DWR will initiate consultation with the State Water Board. Better put my glasses on. And after the process is complete, DWR will notify you of our final determination for the GSP and the Madera Subbasin. In the interim, DWR is not posting the GSP for public review and is not initiating a public comment period. And I think the letter that actually went to the State Water Resources Control Board says a bit more, and I'm not going to go fully over it. But now it starts an investigation. The state, I believe, is stepping in, and we'll just have to see. And I'm just wondering if the representative from DWR can talk to us a little bit about that, because there is speculation, at least comments that were made, that the state will be coming in and managing that particular basin because the sustainability agencies haven't performed on the regulation like they're supposed to.
Aaron Cuthbertson, California Department of Water Resources. So in this case, you're talking about a basin with multiple GSAs within the basin. And the GSAs, which is different than your basin. So your basin, 1 GSA, 1 basin. Your GSA covers the entire basin. In that case, there are multiple GSAs that each carve out portions of the basin, but they need to manage the basin
Together.
together. So they need a coordination agreement in place to ensure that that happens. And that's what they're referring to there. So they don't, I'm not familiar with the details of this, but it sounds like they didn't get the coordination agreement in place.
No, and the agreement.
So that's the problem.
One of the entities refused to sign,
Mm-hmm.
and that was made very known publicly, and also to DWR.
Yeah, and they're required to have that coordination agreement in place, so they're not adhering to Sigma at that point if they don't get that in place.
So they're, because of that, they're going to be investigated by the State Water Resources Control Board, because that's also part of the regulation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's a fear of that happening here, it doesn't apply because you don't
We're
need
one.
you don't need a coordination agreement.
Right. We are one.
You're one GSA,
agency,
one
yes.
basin. So
Right. But I thought it was pretty interesting, because there, if you don't comply, what does that mean? If you don't get your document in, your plan, by January 1, 2022, you know, these are the things that can happen. So I know people in Madera County are very nervous about this.
yeah. And as long as you're talking about the, you know, for the critically overdrafted basins, those plans are in now. So this is, you know, this is a set of them in Madera, but they're all in, and you can look at those. They're all online, posted.
Except Madera.
Except Madera, because they don't have the coordination agreement.
Right.
Right.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's very interesting as, you know, this goes on and politics behind it. Humboldt County also spoke, and they're upset because their alternate plan was not accepted. And so now they're behind, way behind, in going forward with their GSP. But just looking at different circumstances across the state is interesting. I was just informed, I thought it was in conference room C, but evidently it's here in the board chambers. So I took more time than I guess I should have. They're getting ready for a press conference on the virus, and our public health doctor will be speaking. Is that correct?
Correct. After adjournment, we're going to be turning this room over for a press conference. You guys are welcome to stick around if you're interested in COVID-19 coronavirus, or watch live on our YouTube.
So it'll be the newest update for our county and actions. So seeing nothing else, I think we need to adjourn. Thank you very much. We're back in May, right, Sarah? Thank you. You're not staying?